So today we are coming to talk about Psalm 125. And if you were not here for the last 5 weeks, maybe this is a good time to catch up with what we've been talking about. So we started a series talking about the Psalm of Ascensions. And these Psalms goes from Psalm 120 through Psalm 134. So these 14 Psalms we call the Psalm of the Ascension because they are Psalms that the pilgrimage will sing as they go towards Jerusalem. But this is for me, I found it sometimes very hard to talk about that for people who live in this 21st century in Minnesota to understand why this was a big deal. And I wonder about why every time I talk about these pilgrimages who spend maybe days or even months on a very risky road, and some of them will even sell some of their properties or farms just for the sake of one trip. Let's be honest. For most of us in this context, a lot of this does not make sense to us. Why this is a big deal? And it's for me today to make it simple for you. It's like if you ask a child and say, what do you think about the 4th of July? And they tell you the fireworks. You know? That's good. That's one aspect of the 4th of July. But we should be sad if only our children knows they can learn about the 4th of July is just the fireworks, right? So that's why you need to tell the story. Yes, that's one side, the joyful, the party. But really there is a history behind it. You have to tell your children. Why do we take time every year to say stop and remember where we started as a nation? And it's not just about fireworks. There is a story behind the 4th of July. And the same way I found it will be very helpful to understand where these people are coming from. As a Jew, why it is so important for them? Why it's so important to have a holy place we call Jerusalem? Why it's so important to go and to spend maybe some of their saving for the whole life for the sake for one trip? So I'm going to give you a quick introduction of the Jewish history to let you know why this was a big deal for them to make this trip to Jerusalem. As we said, this psalm is part of what they used to chant as they were traveling toward Jerusalem. This time, sometimes it was used to remind them that why we are doing that. And sometimes it was used to support each other when they walk in the darkness. The only thing they can do, they cannot see each other, but they can hear each other singing. And if you hear these people singing and chanting, you may think they're happy. But actually, it was mixed with fear. They want to say to each other, you are not alone. You are a Jew, I am a Jew. You are so excited about this trip, I am so excited about this trip. Are you afraid about what you may encounter on this trip? Me too, I'm afraid. So it was just not this noise that makes everybody think that they were happy, but also they were worried and concerned about their trip. So Jews who came from out of Israel, they dreamed about that. And we have to understand why Jews lived outside of Jerusalem. If you are lived close to any part of Israel, you should be able to make it. You have to know that Jews all over history, they've been scattered all over Middle East. And that's why we call any Jew outside of the Holy Land, we call Jews in diaspora, in the outside of the Holy Land. So these people who lived outside, they're always homesick about the dream to go back to the land of honey and milk, the land of peace, and all these wonderful images. But unfortunately, sometimes people go to this image that they build in their head, and they found an awful reality on the ground. And that's what happened to them. When they went back and saw Jerusalem was destroyed, and ruins, and nothing, and the image that they built in their mind and their heart was contradicting the image that they saw in front of them. And when this happens, people can lose faith and can start to doubt many things. Can I trust that the promises I heard from God? After all this long journey and after everything that's happened to me, here I am. I'm in a city that deserted. I do not see the temple. I see just the ruins of the temples. And again, going back to why this was an upsetting experience for those who arrived to the city. Because they remember this land was given to their grandfathers when they were left out of Egypt, when they came out of the slavery and given the new land. Why Jerusalem is a big deal for a Jew? Jerusalem claimed to be the place where Abraham tried to sacrifice his only son Isaac. And we think that he built a little altar. And we think the assumption, we are not accurate historically about that, but that's an assumption that somehow it was exist in Jerusalem, and especially on Mount Zion. So that's why if you are a very strong core Jew, you will be like to be named as Zion or Zionist, because that's the core of the core. So if Jerusalem is the holy city, the Mount of Zion is the holy of the city. And this goes back to the idea that's where Abraham, and Abraham is a big deal for the three religions. Christian, Muslim, Jews claim Abraham to be the father. He's the guy, the founder of any of the religions. Each religion translates that differently. We're not going to talk about this today. But just for your knowledge, the three major religions in the world, everybody will pick and claim Abraham as their founder and their father. So from there, that's why you get the idea why Jerusalem is a big deal for the Jews. The second thing that Jerusalem became a big deal because the biggest guy, the most famous guy, the celebrity that's named David, the king, the priest. You name David, give him all the good titles you want. Even, I think also has another bad titles, but we like only to claim the good titles for David. Any good titles you can give it to David, and he will take it. And he deserves it. But on the other side, there is another side of David too we do not like to talk about. So David was a very good guy that's really, he became like the dream of what Israel can be as a state. So when the Israelites came out of Egypt, they were just nomads, just a group of people, they didn't know what they're coming. They're just coming out of Egypt, a very strong country, big empire, and they're coming out to a desert and they're trying to figure out what can we do now. We know how to be under empire, but we don't know how to run our own business. So they literally were like tribes, on just nomads over the desert after Sinai, and then when they went to the promised land, they didn't know what to start. And later they developed this, well, we want to be like a civilized country. What that mean? We want a king. We don't want a God just to rule us. We want a king like the Egyptians, the Babylonians, all our neighbors. Everybody has a king. Why we cannot have one? So the first king was not David. I want you to remember that. He's not a famous guy because we have some negative interpretation of him. So Saul was the first king for the Israel. And then David, but David is the kind of like the shining king. The guy who united all these tribes and just brought them as one nation. And David has a big dream about to build a house for the Lord. He said, like, I see all these idols, all these neighbors building big temples, and our God is like just in the desert. I want to build a house to the Lord. And that was his big desire. And God told him, I like you, David. I know your heart is very good, but you cannot build a house for me. Why? He said, your hand is full of blood. You cannot build a house for me. And that was very disappointing to a good guy like David who really has the good heart to do good things to God. And God say, here is the compromise. I know you have a good heart, but you have a dirty hand full of blood. We'll make your son will build the temple. And then your desire will be fulfilled not through you, but through your child. And we know this guy is another famous celebrity guy. His name is Solomon. So that's why the temple that was exist in Jerusalem, we call it the first temple or the temple of Solomon. And that's why when you combine all of this tradition, then you start to get why Jerusalem is a big deal, why the temple is a big deal, because there is a story behind it. There is a history of a nation. There is a history of people who were lost and has nothing, and they start to feel their own dignity was growing day after day. And the Solomon temple, we call it Beit HaMikdash in Hebrew, which means the holy house, or the house of the Lord. This temple was created and was amazing, and we have big part in the Bible tells you about the details about the temple and how they built it and all of these things. But this temple, unfortunately, was destroyed for the first time on the hand of a very famous Babylonian king. And those who really interested in history, he is a very famous, not only in the Bible, but also outside the Bible, for those who study the ancient Near East history. His name is Nebuchadnezzar. He's a very strong Babylonian king who came and destroyed the whole temple at the year of 587 BC. He destroyed the temple fully, and that was a big shock for the Jew, because they thought nobody can destroy this place. This is what we are given from God. And if this is destroyed, then we start to question, is God still strong? Is God still awake? Is God still protecting us? So this was a tsunami for their faith. It was not just a house, just not like a church. If something, God forbid, happened to our church, we'll rebuild it again. But this, for them, this is literally the holy site that was built by God's hand. And if anybody can take over, now I start to question who is stronger. Is it my God or Nebuchadnezzar? Who is really powerful? Is my God the God of my ancestor, or the guy overnight he destroyed everything we believed in? I just want you not to mock them. I want you to understand their pain. I don't want you to underestimate their belief and how much they believe in a literal land to be this is where God dwells. I want you to understand their feeling as human, that overnight all this big idea and this strong faith became questioned. And then let's start the question, should we trust God in the future? Should we trust, or should we worship Nebuchadnezzar and say, if you are a strong king, maybe because you are worshiping the right God? How many times our faith crumbled and be like up in the air, or sometimes even almost like vanished, when we encounter a very painful experience in our life. We all do that as a nation, as a group, as a church, but also as individuals. And then we ask ourselves, whom should we trust? I have millions of reasons to doubt God. And I'm wondering about now, how should I restore my faith and my trust in God? These people who encounter all these awful things during their history, is this over? No, it's not over. The sad news, this is the first destruction, okay? We'll just shake ourselves up and rebuild the temple again. And they actually did that. And we call that the Second Temple. And the Second Temple was built in the year 516 BC. And also was built by another guy, Cyrus, he's a Syrian guy. He's like literally today what we call a part of Iran today. Just imagine how the animosity between the Iranian and the Jews today, if you keep close eye on the Middle East, all this crazy politics in the Middle East. Just remember that, just imagine in these days, the person who saved the Jews was the very traditional, the top enemy, was Cyrus. A guy who really one day God changed his heart. He sent them back, and he sent the money and everything, and he rebuilt the temple. That's why when you hear in history, not only in the Christian context, but those who are interested in history, when you hear the Second Temple, that means the temple that was built by a non-Jew. A temple built by a non-Jew. This is the time when this guy, he sent them back, he gave them the money, and he did everything. Okay, God has restored our faith. Now we should be happy. God is really still awake. God is still active. Is it over? Unfortunately, it's not over. So the Second Temple was destroyed of the year 70 after Christ. All the dates before Christ. Now we're talking about the Second Temple was destroyed 70 years AD. So normally we'll be like, if we said Christ died and resurrected around the year 30, 33, we're talking about almost less than 40 years after Christ's resurrection. The Second Temple was fully destroyed and gone. And we know the story about the Romans really want to really punish the Jews very painfully. These Jews were really were their pain in the whole empire in the Middle East. And they said, these people always make a revolution against us. The Romans want to make them quiet forever. And they said, what is the most holy? How can we hurt the Jews in their most important thing? And they say, the temple. They know by power they can put the revolution down. But they want to hurt them and insult them, not only physically, but spiritually and emotionally. So they did that, destroyed the whole thing, and they ride on horses and walk inside Holy of the Holiness on their horses. And if you are a Jew, you cannot imagine that. If you are a Jew, that's unbelievable. Where women cannot be allowed. No man can even go. No, even a regular priest can go inside the Holy of the Holy. Only one time a year, the highest priest goes inside the Holy of the Holiness. Just give you how much holy for them and for the Romans really to hurt them very much. Just to ride on their horses, going in deep into the Holy of the Holiness. Is it over? From this time, we can see the Psalm is reminding us, and he's praying to God and say, if the mountain is surrounding us, he's warning God and say, God, be careful, because there are people who are looking at the wicked and they are seeing them, they are getting powerful, they are running many things, they are really the one that's in the show, and we are getting weaker and weaker and weaker. And the psalmist is somehow kind of like trying to be smart, trying to pressure God to work and say like, take care of us as we are the good one, but be careful. Some of us are going to go from the good side and going to go to the bad side. So he's trying to pray to God. On one hand, he's encouraging his fellow believer and say, do not be afraid. God is the same way as you see the city, as you see the mountains surrounding you. But at the same time, say, God, be careful. I see a lot of us is getting weaker in our faith because we see the people who are running the scene, people who are in power, they are the wicked one. And I'm afraid that more of ours will go somehow join the other side. Is this really a way to start to build and restore our trust in God? Think of what we do today when we try to trust somebody. Trust is not something given. Trust is something you build up. And I call it, it's like this, your bank account. The more you deposit, the more you can withdraw, right? I think that's what we do as human beings. Yeah, maybe we like each other in the beginning, or maybe have like not a good feeling in the beginning. Just that's a human being way. But as we walk in the journey, we can actually start to gain trust toward each other. As life gave us time to show empathy and kindness and understanding, that's the way we start to deposit in each one account. So we can say, I can trust this person to some point. So that's a normal way. Trust is something as the more you deposit, the more you invest in your partners, your wife, your husband, whoever is close to you, the more you invest in that, the more you deposit, then the trust level gets higher. And the psalmist is trying to teach us today is about really, if you want to review your history as a Jew, you need to see God as that God working in everything, not God working in a small piece. So if you just want to see that the story of the Jews, when Abraham went to Egypt out of the starvation, and Egypt became a place of food and safety, a place where he can be nurtured. When you see Jacob and his sons coming down to Egypt too, because we're starvation and they need the wheat, and his son that was taken as a slave to Egypt, Joseph, he became he became the second man of this ancient empire. And as you see starvation on one hand, but you see also salvation on the other hand. As you see that the desperation of trying to find a place, but there was also a place where God said, yes, I allow things to happen, but I do not allow you to be eaten by the bad things. When we see that the contradiction between everybody wants to talk about the slavery, but you cannot talk about the slavery without talking about the exile. You cannot talk about just about them encountering the starvation and the need for food and money. And he cannot talk about God made Egypt exist and flourished at this time so it can be a place to meet their needs. So what we're trying to say today is, as you see, God works on all these difficult things. God works when you are feeling like you are so far from His mercy. And God also works when He showers you with His grace and love. So based on that, you need to refresh your memory and say that, yes, maybe in the moment, maybe what I see now, what I feel now, feels like I'm really kind of like left alone and I'm by myself. But just the God is saying, your faith is saying, just let's take a step back and try to see yourself and review your life. Is only your life about bad times? And your memory, if we start to do some good work, say, no, actually, I had good times in my life. Is only your story, your life story, is about defeat, or about there are a lot of victories in your life too? So our really people of no faith, they are eaten by this kind of like dark side. But us, we are aware of life is not full of roses. And I say, that's my own way. I say, people do not get hurt when life throws roses at you, right? But when life throws stones at you, that's what gets hurt. And we are aware, as a believer, we are not trying to romanticize and make life full of perfect things. We know that life sometimes can be hard and difficult. But at the same time, we know that God works in the most difficult times in our life. Out of slavery, God made Exodus to the Jews. Out of starvation, God planned Joseph and Egypt to be a land of money and food to save those people who came to it. Out of all this 40 years in the desert, God found there a homeland when the Jews settled in the land that later will be the land of the honey and the milk. Out of all these difficult things, God works on all these pieces and all these puzzles. God makes you see things from a different way. God has a plan for you to give you an exodus out of any difficult moment. God is planning to make you settle and grow even when you feel like you are like nomads and you don't know where the road is going to take you. As God allowed the exile to happen in your life. But God said, be careful. There is a spiritual exile that's more than the physical exile. God is today saying, just come to me. Count on me. And I take care of you. You are part of my plan. Restore your trust in me, not based on one event or one actions or one chapters of your life. Your life is not finished. Your life still continue and going. And based on the faith of what I did with you in the past, you should trust that. I will show you a new way for the future. I will take care of you. Hold on your hope. Do not be eaten by despair. And remember that I am God of the past and the present and the future. As you see the nature is providing a holy sanctuary around you, as you see the mountains, as you see all the good things around you, remember that God is the creator of all of these things. And He will never let you down. God is saying, be righteous. Not only in God's eyes, but God wants you to be righteous for yourself and for your church. Be a good person because that's what makes you happy at the end. Not only to make God happy, but to make yourself feel like this is where I belong. I have to bear fruit because that's the nature of anybody who's planted in Jesus Christ. Amen.